Welcome back everyone, it's Eric from Rare Candy, and today we have our very first Lost Thunder deck profile, and today we're going to be taking a look at Lost March. This is definitely, I think, one of the more anticipated new decks that we are getting thanks to the set. And actually too, this is the same list featured in our recent testing rounds video, so if you guys want to see how this deck looks in action, I will be sure to have a link down below in the description for you to check out. And also too, if you're unfamiliar with those testing rounds videos, they usually feature kind of our early, unrefined, rough starting points to begin testing from. So maybe there's a few things in this list we could tweak or improve, just something to kind of keep in mind as we do go through this deck profile. So anyways, yeah, Lost March, definitely one of the more anticipated new decks, like I said. Kind of harkens back to the old Night March deck we've seen in the past, but instead of putting Pokemon in the discard pile, we're trying to put Pokemon in the Lost Zone. So let's take a look at the deck and see what makes it tick. So this deck is comprised of a couple of different attackers. We have Jumpluff and Natu, those are our main attackers. So since we are playing Jumpluff, that means we are playing some Hop-Ips. And there are two in the set, but we are choosing to play the 40 HP one. I think the other one has a slightly better attack if I remember correctly, but I think just having the extra 10 HP is going to be kind of important, just in case you run into things like Buzzwole GX or even the Baby Buzzwole. Both of those Pokemon might be giving you some trouble since they can kind of hit for the numbers that they need to knock you out pretty easily. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. That's why we are going for the 40 HP one. Next up, we are playing 4 copies of Skiploom, though. No rare candies in this deck whatsoever, even though this is a Stage 2 deck. And Skiploom is a pretty important part of the deck. It has this ability, whenever you evolve into Skiploom, you can put Skiploom and all cards attached to it into the Lost Zone, then search your deck for a Jumpluff and replace it with this Pokemon. So that's kind of how this deck is going to get set up. We evolve into Skiploom, we get to put a Jumpluff into play, and then Jumpluff does more damage for every Pokemon in the Lost Zone. So you can easily see the synergy there. I do want to point out too, Skiploom has 60 HP, so very pitiful HP on this entire evolution line, but the Skiploom, it's actually kind of a good thing because it can actually be searched out by Professor Elm's Lecture, which is another card we're going to talk about in this list as well. So that is kind of, again, one of the key cards in this list, and the main attacker, though, is going to be Jumpluff. So we are playing 4 copies of this guy, and has that Lost March attack, hence the name of the deck, for just a single grass energy, 20 times the amount of Pokemon in the Lost Zone. So like I said, kind of similar to the old Night March deck that a lot of people kind of know and love, or maybe not love if they've been on the receiving end of it sometimes. But yeah, so very similar to that type of deck, but just like I said, we're trying to get Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Skiploom is one way we can do that, and we do run some other ways to ramp up our damage as well. I just want to point out too, Jumpluff, weak to lightning, resistant to fighting, which is kind of good, but we are only having 70 HP, so Jumpluff is probably getting knocked out no matter what. And it does have free retreat as well, which is also pretty nice. So that is probably our main attacker of the deck. Like I said, we're using Skiploom to get Pokemon in the Lost Zone, but we're also playing 4 copies of Trumbeak as well. Trumbeak is another new Pokemon from Lost Thunder, and we're not playing any Pikipeks or 2 Cannons. We're literally just playing a Stage 1. That's because it has this ability, whenever it's in your hand, you can put it into the Lost Zone, and then if you do, look at the top card of your opponent's deck, and if it's a supporter card, you can put that into your opponent's Lost Zone. So kind of a fun little disruptive card that sometimes gets you an added benefit, but primarily it's to just go into the Lost Zone to fuel our Jumpluff. So it's, if you ever draw into one, it's just a free 20 damage increase basically. Then next up, even though Jumpluff is our main attacker, we are playing 3 copies of Natu. This is an alternate attacker in the deck. Same attack as Jumpluff, Lost March, 20 for every Pokemon in our Lost Zone, but it just requires a DCE. So this is kind of nice. It just lets us hit for a different type. So if we're going against things like a Buzzwole GX or maybe a Necrozma GX, we can more easily knock those types of Pokemon out. And then just to round out the list, we have a couple of support Pokemon. We have, of course, 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX for that Wonder Tag ability. And we do have some copies of Double Colorless Energy in this list as well. So if we need to, we can use Energy Drive, but most of the time, we would definitely prefer to be attacking with a Natu for a Double Colorless Energy. And then from there, just 1 copy of a Rangaroo to round out the list. For that Instructability, we can draw until we have 3 cards in our hand. So there's a lot of times where we're going to be digging for, maybe just like 1 or 2 last Pokemon that we need to get into the Lost Zone to take a knockout, or maybe we're digging for an energy. A Rangaroo kind of helps us just increase our consistency a little bit and find what we need. Also, it's a nice support Pokemon that is not a GX, unlike Tapu Lele. So A couple of good uses for Oranguru there. And that's going to be it for the Pokemon line, guys. Nothing too fancy, no text or anything like that. Just literally all of our Lost Marchers and a couple of support Pokemon to get set up. So going over to our trainer cards, we're playing 4 copies of Cynthia, of course the best draw supporter we have in the format. Just a nice shuffle and draw 6. We're also playing 4 copies of the new supporter, Professor Elm's Lecture. I already kind of mentioned this card, but this is very similar to the Bridget that we just lost in this previous season's rotation. You get search your deck for 3 Pokemon with 60 HP or less, put them into your hand. So very nice at grabbing these low HP basics. But one thing that's actually very important to note is it does not specify basic Pokemon. So yes, that means we can grab Skiploom, like I mentioned earlier in this video. So sometimes you can even go for like 2 Hoppips and a Skiploom for your next turn. And actually Professor Elm's Lecture is kind of a decent card even in the mid game as well, because a lot of times you might just need a couple of Skiplooms to get out your to get out your Jumpluffs and start attacking. So unlike Bridget, this is actually a card that has some utility throughout the course of a game. So that's why we are maxing this out. It's going to allow us to increase our odds of starting with it, and like I said, it does have some degree of utility later on in the game as well. We have 3 copies of Guzma, of course, just to choose what we want to take knockouts on, and then we have 2 copies of Lily. This is an alternate first turn option. We get to draw until we have 6 cards, but like I said, if it's our first turn, we can draw until we have 8. But aside from that, it's just a nice backup supporter. We're only allowed 4 copies of Cynthia, unfortunately, so we have to populate our deck with some other forms of draw. So that's where the 2 Lily is going to come in at. And actually at a glance, this might look like not a whole lot of draw compared to a lot of decks, but one reason for that is whenever you get out a Skiploom, you're thinning cards out of your deck, which is really nice. And we have some other alternate forms of draw power as well in this deck. We have a ton of search. That's one thing you will see as we go through the trainer cards. So we can actually thin out our deck a lot easier than other decks, which means we don't have as many dead cards floating around. So that is kind of the reason for the slightly lower count of draw supporters here. So going on to our item cards, we have, of course, 4 Ultra Ball, just to search Pokemon out of our deck, the best search card that we have in the game. Similarly, we also have 4 Netball. This is another new card that we're getting from Lost Thunder, and you get search your deck for a basic grass Pokemon or a basic grass energy. So this is really nice, especially if we whiff the first turn Professor Elm's Lecture. We still have all sorts of alternate ways of searching out our Hoppips to get them down on our bench. And similarly in the mid game, let's say we do hit the first turn Professor Elm's Lecture, this card still has a lot of utility throughout the game because we can find those extra 1 or 2 copies of Hoppip floating around or grab Grass Energy. We actually don't play a whole lot of Grass Energy in this list, so this is a situation where Netball actually comes in a lot of handy. Next up, we have 2 copies of Great Ball. This is another ball search card we have. A lot of the Japanese players who have been messing with this deck, some have played Timer Ball, and that's actually a card I've tried in here as well. I think that's a perfectly fine consideration if you want to play Timer Ball instead of Great Ball, but I'm playing the Great Ball because it serves kind of a similar utility. It's just an extra form of search. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck, get a Pokemon you find there, put it into your hand. So the reason I'm playing this over Timer Ball, though, is because, of course, it's not a coin flip, that's the obvious one, but also it's better in the early game because we can maybe, if we don't have a Professor Elm's Lecture in hand, we can maybe hit a Tapu Lele off of the Great Ball, or, find our Hoppips or something like that. So it's just a lot better on your first turn, and so that's kind of why I am favoring it. But like I said, if you do want to try Timer Ball, I think that's perfectly acceptable as well. Next up, we have 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, just as a form of recovery to get some Pokemon shuffled back into our deck. Next up, we have 3 copies of another new card from the set that is going to be a Lost Mixer. So this is another draw option we have. We get to put 2 cards from our hand into the Lost Zone and then draw a card. So this is nice because we can dump extra Pokemon we might not need in the late game, like Tapu Leles, just as an example, or maybe we have a couple of extra Natus we're probably not going to use. But also it's nice because we can throw away extra copies of Professor Elm's Lecture in the late game as well. So it's another card, like I said, it just helps with our consistency, and also it helps fuel our Lost March attackers as well. And then just to round out the list, we have 3 copies of Choice Band to increase our damage output done to GXs. So one thing that's nice about this deck is we can pretty easily, I would say, knock out a lot of the non-GX Pokemon that are kind of floating around. So that's why we were playing the copies of Choice Band, just because especially once you get near like the 210 range, like where a Zoroark is going to be at, sometimes you need that extra little push just to get over that 210 HP hump. So that's going to be it for the trainer cards. Going on to our energy, we don't have a whole lot, but we have 4 grass energy, of course, for our Jumpluffs. We have 3 copies of double colorless energy, and then we have 1 copy of super boost energy prism stars. So a couple interesting things going on here with this energy count. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't play a whole lot of energy, but the reason for that is we only play 4 Jumpluffs. We can only ever basically have 4 Jumpluffs because Skiploom goes into the lost zone whenever we evolve into it, so we're not going to be attacking with like a Jumpluff we're going to rescue stretcher back or anything like that. So we literally just need 4 grass energy for that, and Netball can actually help search those out like I mentioned. 3 double colorless energy as well. We're only playing 3 copies of Natu, and Jumpluff is kind of our main attacker, so that's why we are favoring the heavier grass energy type of count here. And kind of the one interesting card I know people are going to have some questions about is going to be the 1 copy of Super Boost Energy Prism Star. So this is a colorless energy by default, but if it's attached to a stage 2, it's a rainbow energy. But if you have 3 stage 2s in play, it provides 4 rainbow energies essentially, which is nuts. So you guys might be thinking, well, what's the reason for this? Jumpluff only attacks for a single energy, and the reason for this is because some of the Japanese players were actually playing this to get around things like Shuckle GX. Now it remains to be seen how big of a force Shuckle GX is going to be in the format, but I think at the least this is definitely better than a 5th grass energy, just because it will give you that option to get around Shuckle if it is going to be a card that sees play. But if Shuckle doesn't see play, then you could easily cut this for a 5th grass energy if you really wanted to. But I really like the idea that the Japanese had, so I wanted to try it out and see how it does here. So yeah guys, that's going to be our first attempt at a Lost March deck. I have to say, this deck is actually a ton of fun to play. The whole mechanic how, like whenever you evolve into Skiploom, you send it to the Lost Zone, is just a really fun mechanic to make use of. Trumbeak is also like a pretty wild card. It's just a very unique play style to the deck. It's just a ton of fun to play. So if nothing else guys, I would say try it out. But it's definitely also a deck I would expect to see some play as well. And actually guys, if this is a deck that's on your radar that you are looking forward to, our stage 2 patrons and higher over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg actually have access to an exclusive article on Lost March detailing some additional ways you can build this deck, and actually some of my impressions testing this deck as well, and where I think it kind of fits into the metagame going forward. So I will have a link down below in the description if you want to check that out. But as usual guys, feel free to like and subscribe, and definitely stay tuned to the channel. We're going to have a ton of other Lost Thunder content coming over the next several weeks. And if you can, consider supporting this channel, like I mentioned, over on patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store at rarecandytcg.com, like the Night March playmat you saw in this video. That would also be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you next time.